Hi, everyone. Before we get started today, I would like to do a land acknowledgement that was written by a woman who is a native woman here in Colorado Springs. This means a lot to me that we really, when we take the time to hear this, kind of digest what I'm saying. And I know we do land acknowledgements a lot now for some of us. For some, maybe not as often. So I would just like to center our attention on the land that we are on historically, and what that means to the ancestral people of this land, and what it means by us displacing them and having this space here. So I'll get into that. Thank you for your attention. Colorado Springs acknowledges that the land on which we reside is the homeland and unceded territory of many indigenous nations, specifically the Ute people. We also recognize the 48 tribal nations that are historically tied to Colorado. Accurately acknowledging the past is crucial in honoring the truth of our collective histories and demonstrating our respect for the original inhabitants of this land. We must note that many of our city's founders participated in the Sand Creek Massacre, where more than 230 Cheyenne and Arapaho were killed. I always like to add that the majority of those killed were women and children. Today, Governor Polis repealed the Evans Proclamation and made it legal to kill indigenous and native people here in this state. And that's how the Sand Creek Massacre happened and no one was prosecuted for it. May this acknowledgement demonstrate a commitment to working to dismantle ongoing legacies of oppression, to consult with tribal governments, and recognize the current and future contributions of our indigenous community while reconciling a painful history. And the last thing I'd like to note that we still have hundreds of boarding schools where Native children were sent. And thus far, they have uncovered 5,000 bodies, and we still have hundreds of schools to evaluate. So, at this time, I'd like to pass the mic to Thayer Tut, and he's going to get us started. Thank you.
Patricia, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me through a mask? All right, this is Kyle, thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to Elpamar Foundation's Equity and Inclusion event. We are very honored to have you all here. I'm Thayer Tut, Vice Chair of Elpamar Foundation, and we have a great crowd. We look forward to the opportunity today. The Heritage Series program was started 6 years ago to celebrate and honor the natural assets of the Pikes Peak region. We do it by convening stakeholders in civic, community, and nonprofit sectors to discuss important issues to the preservation, use, and care of our natural assets. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize the individuals who helped put together today's event. We start with our Heritage Series Director, Erica Oakley-Courage. Erica. We have 4 of Elpamar's fellows, or program associates as they're called. Matt Clark, where's Matt? Over here. Alex Bisbee. Emily Wagner. And Emily Williams. Thank you very much. We also have a special former fellow, Claire Girardeau, who actually, she's finished a fellowship. She's off to graduate school in probably a couple of weeks at Northwestern. But she conceived this idea of this program over a year ago and shepherded it till she ended her fellowship a couple of months ago. So Claire, why don't you stand up and we all recognize you for a brilliant idea. We would also like to recognize the Community Foundation, Pikes Peak Community Foundation, for their sponsorship of this event with Elpamar, and Mina Liebert, who... Apologize, this is awkward. But Mina, thank you very much for your leadership and working with this panel. It's well documented that spending time outdoors and engaging in recreation has positive physical, mental, and social benefits. Today you'll hear from local and statewide experts in the outdoors industry who will talk about access to the outdoors and the opportunities that are here before you. We hope that all of you will be inspired and engaged to go back to your communities and help develop programs for groups to be more active in the use of our community assets. So thank you very much. I'd like to introduce Alex Bisbee, second-year fellow and co-director of the Heritage Series program, to make some comments.
give myself some more credit. Hi, my name is Alex Isbicki. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'm a second-year fellow at Alpha Mar Foundation, as Mr. Todd mentioned. And as a program with a mission centered around convening community leaders, we are excited to be able to be back in person and communing around today's topic. Each year, the Heritage Series hosts events centered around celebrating the natural assets of the Pikes Peak region and the use of those resources. We do this by convening notable leaders from the sector to share a variety of insights and perspectives on a range of important and timely topics. Throughout the last year, a conversation continued to emerge as our team was meeting and planning around how we could convene experts to discuss the issues and opportunities related to equity and inclusion in the outdoors. The outdoors is often a very homogenous environment, and our team was interested in raising and amplifying the voices of those leaders in our community and around the state who are ensuring that our hiking and biking trails, fishing poles, climbing spots, whatever thing you do in the outdoors, looks the way that our communities do. And first, I want to thank you all for coming here today, for engaging in that conversation with us. I think many of us have taken much more time in the last year to think more about the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion in many facets of our life, and outdoor recreation should absolutely be on that list. So thank you for allowing this event to be part of that process for you and joining us here today. While I'm not the experts are who you'll be hearing from today, I wanted to take a few moments to provide a very brief history on background before stepping out of the way to allow our panelists to share their knowledge and experiences with us. The National Park Service, so this is a brief history lesson, the National Park Service was established in 1916 by Woodrow Wilson in order to consolidate what was at that time a disparate system of federal parklands under one agency. The initial parks that were at that time were established starting with Yellowstone in 1872 as individual wilderness preservation areas. And while it varied from park to park, those areas were certainly not immune to the Jim Crow segregation of that time. Many had segregated amenities, if not outright bans on visitation for people of color. And in addition, many leaders of the environmental movement in this time, like John Muir, held openly racist beliefs against Black and Indigenous peoples that may have left their mark on these institutions that are still governing our public lands. And access to our national lands were restricted by race for almost another 30 years until 1945, when Secretary of Interior Harold Ickes mandated desegregation of all national parks. Even when these mandates from the federal government were in place, access to national parks often remained every bit as exclusionary through much of the 20th century, especially prior to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It is with this in mind that some data illuminating inequitable use and access to outdoor recreation should not come as a surprise to us. While 40% of the US population identifies people of color, a survey produced by the National Park Service in 2020, only 23% of their visitors identified as such. And conversely, white people, while only making up 58% of the total population of the US, made up the 77% of national park visitors. And that lack of diversity is also present in the staff who operate these sites. While 79% of the full-time Park Service is white, only 7% of the NPS service is Black, significantly less than the 13.4% of the nation's population who identify as such. I'd also like to briefly recognize that outdoor recreation can mean things that are less involved than a far-flung trip to Zion, Arches, or Yellowstone. For many, outdoor recreation is a run in a nearby park or a bike ride through a local green space. And not only do trees and greenery help clean the air and keep our cities cool, reducing the physical strain on those living there, green spaces also provide a benefit to our psychological health. Numerous studies show again and again that taking a walk through nature lowers heart rate and reduces stress, with some studies even showing that regular 90-minute walks in nature could stave off depression. However, given historical racism in housing practices and city planning, many of our most diverse neighborhoods have been left without the urban green spaces needed to get these quick bursts of time in nature, as well as the health benefits conferred by them. Only 23% of white people live in areas with less than the median amount of natural land, while 67% of Latino families and 68% of Black families do. People of color are 3 times less likely than their white peers to live in places that have immediate access to nature. It is with this in mind that it is critically important that we think of green spaces both in our backyards and in the backcountry as not just something that is nice to have, but imperative that all members of our community should have equitable and ready access to, so that each of us are able to benefit from our natural resources in ways that support all of our thriving. Today's panel will be moderated by Mina Liebert. Mina is the Director of Community Impact at Pikes Peak Community Foundation and a member of the Board of Directors for Great Outdoors Colorado. Briefly, my one last update for today and my one bad flight attendant joke. We have food and beverages for each of you, and we invite you to please share them with us during, before, and after. But we do ask that you just remove your mask for your bite, and then put your mask back on, so we can continue to keep ourselves safe here as we convene. And with that, as I promised at the top, I'll step out of your way and turn it over to Mina to let the folks that you came here to see take over. So thank you so much for joining for us, and we look forward to seeing you at future Heritage Series events.
And what we're reflecting on related to outdoor recreation and open public lands and use of them. So I will have the panel actually introduce themselves and share a little bit about who they are and what they do, starting with Patricia.
I was surprised somehow. So I'm Patricia Cameron. I am the founder and executive director of Black Packers. We're a nonprofit that's based out of Colorado Springs, but we serve everyone in the Colorado Springs community. I lived here for 27 years. All of that time, most of that time in the southeast quadrant, as it's so lovingly called, in Gateway Park, which is neighboring to Pikes Peak Park. I went to Sierra, Panorama, Carmel, that kind of stuff. I'm the mother of a lovely 14-year-old son with a big red afro, so you might see him around here. I'm also a journalist for the outdoors. I work for Backpacker Magazine, Elevation Outdoors, a Denver Post with the Colorado Sun. I also write about equity issues and all of those, transportation, housing, justice, those things of that nature. And Black Packers, our tagline is economic equity and outdoor recreation. What I like to say is we meet people at the intersection of underrepresentation and economic vulnerability. So we take our participants out and pay for everything. For example, we went to Arapahoe Basin and took 27 people skiing and snowboarding. Crystal, Crystal's daughter. We pay for everything. That includes gear, so that's skiing, snowboarding gear, clothing, at times transportation. COVID made that harder. But just basically anything that people need to get out, we pay for. We have a gear locker that people can rent gear once they've been exposed to a Black Packers activity. So if they've been camping with us, they can borrow camping gear. I also work at Mountain Equipment Recyclers on 2222 Bott Avenue. Jobs there. We sell new and used gear, but we're also a part of Kids on Bikes, and so we're deeply embedded in the nonprofit community. We give 100% of our net profits back to the community through supporting charitable causes. And so basically everything I do, including in Mountain Equipment Recyclers, is to make things affordable and accessible, and I like to focus on the economic portion of why people are unable to get outdoors.
Thank you, Patricia. Crystal?
Hi, everyone. Okay, I'm just naturally loud, so. Hi, everyone. I'm Crystal Egley. I'm the co-founder of Inclusive Journeys. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, starting with that trip to A Basin I took with Black Packers. I paid $3.75 to teach my daughter how to ski. And I would absolutely not have gone and done that if it was, because she's 3, like, why would I spend hundreds of dollars teaching a 3-year-old who's gonna pay attention for 20 minutes, right? But those are now memories. I'm hoping it's her first memory. Like, I'm trying to remind her about that ski trip and reinforce it so it's her first memory. But that was very important to me because I grew up in rural Vermont and I'm adopted, so both my parents are white. When I tell folks I'm half black, half white, they say, which one of your parents is black? And I say, neither. And then their faces are like really confused. So when it comes to talk about like generational wealth and stuff, I'm slightly exempt from that, right? But I also do carry a lot of the trauma of having incredibly racist direct relatives. And so that was difficult growing up. But a lot of folks, when I was a board member for environmental learning for kids, assumed that, you know, I'm like some poor kid from the urban city. I'm like, I went to sailing camp. Like, I'm not, you know, like I'm not like a, you know, and so now it's the folks that I try to help, is like the people that folks assume that I am is a very real reality, and they need help getting to the outdoors. Very, very true. I always kind of took it for granted, not gonna lie. I took it for granted. I just thought that Black folks and people that looked like me did it somewhere else because they just didn't live in Vermont. And when I left Vermont, I was like, oh, we're still not out over here. But also with that, I just want to give a caveat, trailing on to get on my intro, that just because you don't see folks out there doing these activities, people of color doing activities, doesn't mean they're not out there already. Just means they're not doing it where you're doing it. And I just wanted to make sure I caveated my first statement with that as well. Don't just assume because you don't see people, Black folks, biking where you bike or skiing where you ski, that they're not doing it at all. Just means they're not doing it. Like, re-examine the spaces where you're doing it. I'll end by saying I co-founded Inclusive Journeys, which I started with my business partner, Parker McMillan-Bushman. A lot of folks might know that name. She's way more popular than me. She's kind of famous on TikTok, talking about diversity and equity and racism. And basically, it's a website where people can rate businesses and spaces on how they were treated in regard to their identity. And then we can take that data on the back end and demonstrate if there is bias, if there is exclusion, or if, maybe just some general bad customer service. But either way, we have resources for people who want to do better, who want their businesses or their parks or their spaces to be more inclusive. They can use that data, and we'll give customized reports, and we'll give customized recommendations as well on what they could do to improve. That's me.
Awesome. Thanks, Crystal. Well, first and foremost, just wanted to thank Laura and all of you for being here tonight, and a lot of gratitude for having me join this panel. I'm the CEO of the American Alpine Club, but before we talk about the club, maybe a little bit about my journey here into the outdoors and my 30 years as a climber. So I'm born in Japan, moved to Seattle, or just outside of Seattle, to a suburb called Bellevue. Eric just talked about how we try to diminish the fact that we're from Bellevue. It's a very wealthy white neighborhood or suburb of Seattle. So we moved when I was 6, and as I was turning 16, my parents decided that 3 boys, I have 2 brothers, were growing up a little bit soft because we're growing up in the suburbs of Seattle, and sent us to Alaska. So there's a morning that I wake up on an airplane to Anchorage. From Anchorage, and a smaller plane to King Salmon. There I am to charter a bush plane to get me to Chignik, which, if you look at the Alaska Peninsula, is almost near the end of the peninsula. And I spent the next 3 months on a fishing boat with 3 other people. What is amazing about that moment, though, wake up in Bellevue. By evening, I'm on the end of a dirt runway looking into the Pacific Ocean. No one was there to pick me up as they were supposed to be. But what a moment to look out into the ocean with awe and just about to embark on maybe the greatest adventure in my life. That year turned into 5 more seasons of fishing in Alaska. And then I needed a way to replace that, right? So for myself, there was a need for adventure, need to explore, need to kind of push physical limits, coupled to a little bit of danger or a lot of danger. And so as I finished up my, do I call that a career as a fisherman, turned to the outdoors and I became a climber and skier. So I spent a decade after college living out of a van, driving up and down the West Coast, working as a climbing guide and an outbound instructor. Eventually, it became really clear that, I can't call my van home forever, that I needed to transition out and call that transportation. So transitioned out, went back to school, and then became the executive director of the Northwest Outward Bound School, based out of Portland, Oregon. Last August, I transitioned here to lead the American Alpine Club. So the American Alpine Club, we are, as of this year, we are 120 years old. Founded in New York, and have been kind of the foundation of climbing in America. Our goal is to inspire climbers to do more, to reach a little bit further in climbing and themselves, and our work focuses on education, community building, and policy and advocacy. We also have the North America's largest climate-specific library archives right up the street in Golden, 190,000 volumes. So we are the historians of North American climate. Having said that, you can imagine 120 years of, I'm going to say, extracting climbing opportunities around the world, and colonizing around the world, and building a very exclusive organization, right? So up until the 90s, you had to have 2 sponsors, plus a climbing resume that was robust enough to go into a very opaque process, and then somebody gave you a thumbs up or a thumbs down to be a part of the membership. So we recognize as the club that we are complicit really in creating a very exclusive industry. Like, we were the ones, 120 years of creating it. So at this point, the board a few years ago came together and said, we need to own this, and then we need to take responsibility into trying to form some change. So the American Alpine Club today, we're looking at everything from our bylaws to how we engage with the climbing community and the outdoor community, and asking ourselves, how can we do what we can to right the wrongs that we've been a part of? So that is what the American Alpine Club is doing today. I can get into more of that later on in the conversation.
Thanks, Mitsu. Hi there, I am Jackie Miller. I am the Interim Executive Director at Great Outdoors, Colorado. I am also a recovering New Yorker, since everyone's given a little bit of background about themselves. I'm first generation on my dad's side. I grew up with a giant Italian family back east and thought that the outdoors in this entire world would just compromise my grandmother's backyard, and that the only people who existed were family before I moved to Vermont for college, and then came out to Colorado 15 years ago and stumbled upon this wonderful organization to work for called Great Outdoors Colorado. So for folks that don't know, GoCo, as we're known, was created by a vote of the people to permanently dedicate a portion of Colorado lottery revenue to parks, trails, wildlife, rivers, and open space. Our citizens back in 1994 knew that our population was going to change and grow and wanted to dedicate permanent revenue to ensuring that we preserved all the things that we cherish so much about this state. In our nearly 30-year history, we've invested close to $1 billion towards our mission, and that's in all 64 counties across the state. We feel really privileged in Colorado to have a funding source like GoCo, but of course, there's never enough money to preserve, protect, and particularly steward what we love about this state. About 6 years ago, we started asking ourselves kind of the why behind our investments. We had protected a lot of land, we had built a lot of parks, but we wanted to understand who we were reaching and who we weren't reaching. And as part of our 2015 statewide public engagement tour, we heard from people at that time that there were huge swaths of the population who were not connecting to the tremendous natural resources we have here in Colorado, and that they saw GoCo as a unique funding source to bring all the efforts that were going on across the state to address this issue together under one umbrella, and we created the Generation Wild initiative. And to date, we've committed $50 million to fueling the statewide network to help local communities identify local barriers to the outdoors and come up with community-identified solutions to those barriers. And so we've invested in park infrastructure in communities across the state. We invest in youth programming that provides young people with a diversity of experiences from a very young age up through high school. And then we also invest at the community level in pathways to careers, leadership, and education opportunities. To date, we have 12 coalitions. You all have one of the most rock star coalitions here in the Pikes Peak region. So Chris Obie leads the Generation Wild of the Pikes Peak region, and I would love all the representatives from that coalition, because I see the Wilder masks out there, to stand up if you're here. And of course, Tila Larson, who now works for GoCo, I'm sorry I stole her from Colorado, who huge champion for the work here in Colorado Springs as well. So we learned a lot along our journey as a funder about equity in the outdoors, coming from a big place of humility and really working with our on-the-ground community-based partners to understand how we as a funder could better connect and provide opportunity for communities across the state. And we took a learning-based approach to the implementation of our Gen Wild initiative. It was not graceful all the time, it was not perfect, it was clunky sometimes, but in the end, the results have proven to be really successful. And there's been a tremendous amount of shared learning amongst our statewide network, us as a funder, and community members as well. And we had the opportunity to roll in so much of what we learned in those 5 years into every aspect of our 2020 strategic plan, not just in how the programs that we run, but how we operationalize our plan as well. And we'll have an opportunity to talk about that as part of this panel. So thanks so much for having us.
Thank you to all for sharing your personal history as well as a little bit about your organization. And I know with wearing masks, sometimes it can be hard for us to hear, so just a reminder for all of us as we speak into the microphones, if we can enunciate as best we can so that everybody can hear in the back of the room as well as in the front. So I will start. We want this to be a conversation, and we want our panelists to be as interactive as possible with all of you. So in the middle of the table, there is a site called slide.do. And if you have any questions for our panelists, please send your question to that link, and the hashtag number to put in is 314586. And questions will come to me magically, and then I will get to ask them to everybody. So I think we've provided a lot of history, and we've provided a lot of background for each of our panelists' organizations, as well as, again, their personal history. And to expand on that, our first question is related to how this history continues to impact current use of our public lands. So this is an open, I'm not going to call on anybody directly just yet, but if anybody wants to start us off.
I can start. So before I started Inclusive Journeys, I actually worked at Colorado Parks and Wildlife as a videographer for 5 years. And I got to travel the state of Colorado, I'm trying to remember to enunciate, the state of Colorado for 5 years. One of my best meetings was my supervisor wanted to give me feedback, and he said I should spend even more time in the woods just filming animals. So, like, best job ever. So I really just got to travel the state and see everything, right? So when Black History Month rolled around each year, guess who was like, hey, are we gonna talk about this here? And folks were like, well, there's not much to talk about. There's not really any Black history in the state parks. And I was like, wait, I'm sorry, what? So I said, challenge accepted, and I was on a mission, right? It did take a lot of digging, but there might not be books available on Amazon right now about very specifically like Black historical context in Colorado state parks that are still here today. But there's folks who are writing PhD papers. There's people who are doing research. There's groups that exist that know the history orally and have handed it down. There's families that are here. There's people alive who remember what it was like when it was segregated. And to say something like, you know, that history does not exist is really, well, hit page 2 of your Google search, okay? So I did a lot of digging, and it's one of those things where it's like that extra burden on the person of color, the person who cares about it. But one of the things that really came to mind, not necessarily on a research level, but just on a personal context level, is just looking at the history of segregation. And even though folks say like, hey, segregation ended before X Park was here or X space was open, that land and the people who were there still remember. Like, it's not like you take down a sign and all of a sudden everyone's cool, right? We're all like, oh good, racism's over. Like, we can totally roll up here and do that. Like, that's not how it works. Every time folks watch a documentary about Black history and see, you know, civil rights warriors and justice and equity fighters, they're like, wow, that person's still alive, how cool, they're being interviewed. The people on the other side are still alive as well. All right, they just didn't, nobody wants to interview them. So just remember that those folks, the folks that faced those oppressions and that segregation, remember it. They talk about it. It's held very deeply in their souls. That trauma is still there, and they pass it down. They tell people, like, they built new traditions in other places, right? So just taking down those signs and ending segregation does not necessarily do much to help shift what that land still means, what that space still means, which is why land acknowledgements are very important, because this land that we're on right now, like that grass outside, means something different to different people. And to acknowledge that, the park right there, I sat in that park this morning and like worked on my laptop, that ground means something completely different to different people. And so to be able to have those perspectives about space and what you see in those spaces, every time you see a big giant tree with thick limbs in the middle of nowhere, that means something different to you than it does to me. It can be scary just to see a tree, and I love trees, right? Certain types of trees remind us of certain things. So every single thing that you see and experience on what we call public land, which I have a lot of mixed feelings about, use a lot, yay, but public to who, and what does that mean later. But yeah, it means something different to everyone, and to be able to bring those contexts together, that historical context, and really try to empathize with the fact that people, like maybe it wasn't me, but there's folks maybe in this room who were alive to see that stuff, and it's still there, even though we don't see it as obviously.
Can I piggyback on what you said, Crystal? So if I remember right, there was a survey done by U.S. Swim Foundation, I think 2017, and in that survey, it reported that 36% of Black kids 4 to 18 reported that they knew how to swim. Right? 60% of white kids 4 to 18 in that same survey said they knew how to swim. So that's that's twice as many white kids. And when you look at that, and when you dig deeper into that report, what you learn is in, I think it was 1963-ish, 1960 something. Don't hold me to those numbers. Just that year. NAACP brought to court the state, or Baltimore was segregating her pools. It was happening all across the country, right? And NAACP lost that case, but in appeals court, it was upheld that we can no longer segregate her pools. From that, we see suburban membership-based pools come out, right? So they lost the case, or the NAACP won the case. Now we have membership pools meant only for folks with money, really, and really white folks. And so we see that history 50 years later, or 60, so 70 years later, we see the difference in ability to swim, because it is generational, right? It is steeped in history, so we see that happening today. Let's just keep piggybacking on you. When I think about the conservation movement in America, I think we often forget that that is actually born from violently removing people who used to live there, right? It's about conserving lands. It is not about conserving people or cultures. And we have to just acknowledge, and we have to hold that as truth. I suspect that most of us, me included until just a few years ago, don't even question the names of some place names, right? Yosemite. Do we know what that word actually means? I know that, I see some head nods, so I know that some folks do. But my guess is that most of the American public does not. It's good to Google that, right? Squaw Valley, right? Do we actually know what that word squaw means? I think looks like majority of folks in this room does. But if you haven't Googled that, if you haven't actually asked these questions, I think it's really important to do that. I'll leave it there for now. I don't want to take up too much airspace.
We can actually expand on that and talk about some of the barriers in addition to, how we're currently looking at how history reflects on our public lands. What are barriers that prevent our communities of color and our diverse communities from actually accessing the outdoors?
Yeah, I'd like to, super stoked to talk about this one. Let me get my super stoked shoulders. I like to talk about this part because I think for a long time, we've been talking about just diversity and inclusion, so we've just been really excited to see like a black face in like a Patagonia ad or something, and we are stopping at why we didn't see a lot of black faces outdoors. And here I'm going to speak to what I know about the black community. I'm not speaking for the entire black community or anyone else. I just want to use it as a reference point just in case you were wondering why I'm not speaking on any other communities. I'd like them to speak for themselves. One of the statistics I like to use is since the civil rights movement, the median wealth of a black family has gone down by 75%, and for a white family has gone up by 14%. COVID has only exacerbated that problem. We saw the wealthy somehow manage to get wealthier during the pandemic, and we saw those without have even less. So when we talk about access to the outdoors, let's talk a little bit more than just I don't see black people, maybe they don't. I've been asked, do I like the cold? Like I can't put on a jacket, those kind of things. Or maybe it's not just we're not out there in terms of what you see or whatever stereotypes they have. Maybe there's something built into the very history and the fabric of this country, for reference capitalism and how it works. What that means is they're gonna have haves and have-nots. And when it comes to wealth, that intersection oftentimes lands with people of color, and the statistics I know the best are from the black community. That's why you hear a lot of talk about reparations. Well, I'm not sure if you hear a lot of talk about, we've talked about that before, maybe they haven't talked about it. But wealth was siphoned from the black community. We're talking about home loans, predatory home loans, redlining. This country's wealth is built on owning real estate, owning land, owning houses. That's where people hold wealth in this country. And it has been kept from black communities in the sense that maybe the housing was valued a certain way. Look at how the houses are valued in XYZ quadrants of Colorado Springs. We can compare northeast to south if we want, southeast, northwest, anywhere else. It keeps families for generations from holding and obtaining wealth. And what that means is that when you talk about going outdoors, can I afford to go outdoors? Even if I get past the fact that maybe I'll be the only black person at 11 Mile State Park, that's fine. Even if I get past the fact that I have to drive out there and do I have a car that can make it up, you pass, or can make it up to 11 Mile State Park, that's fine. But do I have the money to afford the park pass? Do I have the money to afford the camping site? Do I have the money to afford the rod and reel? If I'm making enough money to support my family, do I have the extra money after feeding them to go outdoors? And this isn't as simple as people who, we often talk about, budgeting and saving. It's not as simple as I decided to buy some shoes instead of the park pass. I do that a lot though, just to put it out there. I make some interesting choices. But we're talking about how much wealth did my family have and could they pass on to me? A lot of times, majority of times, black homeowners, first-time homeowners have to put that down payment down by their self. And white families can pass the down payment on to their kids. And it starts from the beginning there. So I like to talk about access in terms of generational wealth. It's not just about simple as how much you get paid hourly, although that's huge. We're talking about generations of us that came from slavery to sharecropping to Jim Crow to now. How much money were we able to hold and save? And then lastly, really quickly, because I don't want to get on that subject too much, but I talk a lot about transportation in Colorado Springs in particular. It's something that I'm intimately familiar with as somebody who didn't have a car here, somebody who grew up on the southeast side. We don't have a lot of access for people to get to those places. So when you think about, we kind of assume everybody has a car. That's probably a a privilege that Coloradans understand more than any other place, because my home is DC, that's where my family's from, and transportation is built into like the fabric of the community. It is not so much here. And with that being the case, how often can somebody from the Southeast get to the greener spaces on the other side of town, or north or west side of town? As somebody who works in mountain equipment recyclers, I ride my bike from Shelton Academy to the west side of Colorado Springs, and I can see it get greener as I go, and the trails and the access change. So that's just something, especially for Colorado Springs people, to consider when we talk about access. It's not just, I don't see black faces here, I don't see brown faces here, why don't I? And then when you ask yourself, why don't I see them, think about not just that particular person who woke up that morning, that person's mother and their grandmother, and so on, and what that means.
I'd love to build off of that, and I'm speaking from the experience. We invested in community-led planning processes in urban, rural, suburban, and mountain communities. There were about 18 communities that mobilized community members, again, to identify their barriers. And the barriers across those various diverse communities, there were common themes that existed. And so, you know, cost certainly elevated as one of the primary barriers. It's, you know, the cost of gear, as we talked about, the cost of transportation, the cost for kids to participate in youth programming that gets them really jazzed about spending time outside and lights that spark. And if you live in a lower income neighborhood and potentially a community has not invested in a safe, accessible park in that neighborhood, then their access to green space is limited. Safety and language too, a lot of the, you know, interpretive signage or signage to get people from their neighbor, you know, trail signage and wayfinding signage is often, you know, predominantly in English. And so oftentimes, you know, part of the not feeling welcome in these spaces, not feeling accessible, is that, you know, the language is not representative of the people who are actually visiting. So I just wanted to echo what was said, and that these barriers are, again, reflected in urban, rural, suburban, and mountain communities in Colorado.
I wanted to just tie something Mitsu and Patricia said together in a soundbite and then get all the credit for it, potentially. Raise your hand if you've ever said or heard someone in your organization say, this organization lacks diversity. Anybody? Okay. So, yeah, everybody, that's probably why you're here. I'd like to invite you to constantly flip that script and say things like, how is my organization complicit in the exclusion of Black, Indigenous people of color? And that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? So Mitsu said it very well in the beginning, and then Patricia echoed it, and so just take what my words are. I'm just kidding. But like, there's so many ways to reframe things that are said. I have heard very frequently folks saying, like, lower income neighborhoods. Sorry, Jackie, I'm putting you on the spot.
Do it, take it.
Lower income neighborhoods, which can put the onus on the type of jobs and careers that individuals can get, as opposed to saying reframing it like historically divested neighborhoods. So instead of people in government and local, state, federal government investing into that neighborhood, they're actually taking resources from that neighborhood. And that kind of shifts how we think about it, because words really matter, and they like kind of solidify how we think about these things, right? So I do it all the time, but I like try to just constantly reframe every single thing that I hear in these discussions. And so I'm always that person that's like, hey, can we try to think about that differently? And I invite you to do the same too.
To your point about words and language and phrases mattering, English is like language, so please forgive my tenses sometimes. We've started doing that. Rather than asking ourselves, how do we get to a more diverse outdoors? We're just, at the American Elephant Club, we're just asking, what the fuck happened? Right? Why does the outdoors not reflect the population? Something went wrong, and that actually forces us to ask, what went wrong in this process? In terms of the, barriers, in that, what the fuck happened, we kind of aggregate that into 4 maybe large headlines for ourselves right now. There's a great deal of overt racism out there. Right? I sat down with my friend Earl, who runs an organization called Black People Camp 2.
Yes, I just met it.
Yeah, he's fantastic, right? He talks about driving to a trailhead and driving past 49 Confederate flags to get there, right? Is that safe? No, right? Just isn't. So there's a lot of overt racism out there. In the climbing space, we, First Ascensionists, have the privilege, really, of naming that route. And if you go around this country and look at route names, there are places that are called, I know there's in the south there's a place called Slave Hole, right? And there are route names in there that's called like Whipping Post and that and this. And like that stuff actually exists, and it's really overt, and it is not a safe place. And you know, obviously, you know, that is a barrier to entry. There's a good deal of implicit bias, right? I'm guilty of that. Like I look out there and I move around outdoor spaces with a lot of biases, and I would say that the outdoor industry, both in marketing and creation of equipment and clothing, there's a significant amount of implicit bias. And coupled to that, like the brands and the retailers, their job is to optimize, right? So diversity is actually really expensive. So, you know, when I go out, I can't find in America clothes that fit me, right? Colors don't work because it doesn't make sense in terms of efficiency. There's also a lack of knowledge and education. We just don't share that if you don't have that generationally or within your community. So how do we help the Earls out there learn to go backpacking? That's what his organization does, is to educate. How do we help Earl educate you know, rest of America how to go backpacking and camping?
So I'd like to go a little bit deeper, if we could, and think about and talk about the cultural aspect as a barrier to access. Anybody wants to tackle that?
Gosh, I think it's interesting because I feel like when we say what are cultural barriers, I think we are centering whiteness in that, because I feel like my community and my family does appreciate the outdoors and does a lot of outdoor stuff. It just doesn't look like it does in the manner in which we put a price tag on it. And we were just talking about how a lot of times, a lot of the events Blackpacker has ends up being a big family reunion. It ends up being a barbecue, and ultimately someone's dancing. It gets really like familial. We're taking care of each other's kids. And I think that perhaps, I wouldn't say that there's a cultural barrier insofar as, you know, anything that we in particular don't get down with. I think there has just been barriers of whiteness that's kind of made it look as if our ways aren't as valuable as the other ways that people get outdoors. And so I think I just push back on that a little bit, that not necessarily culturally. I will add, since we're talking about things that are specific, and just to go back to the swimming conversation really quickly, because I think that's related to this. And Blackpacker started an aquatics program, and we're going to teach families to swim. That's coming up in fall. Not just the kids, but the adults too. Because I feel like people in my geriatric millennial generation, they're called this, right? They kind of forget about us because we're like in the middle of that, like our family, our parents maybe didn't go, and we gently started getting into it. We had a pool at Sierra when I was going there, and one of the things that was difficult for me when it came to swimming that made it hard for me is just getting my hair wet. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but at that time I was still relaxing my hair and straightening it. I am free of those shackles. You know, I was doing that because I was told that my curly hair, my afro, wasn't appropriate for school or for life or for work. Living on Sheldon Academy, where was I going to get those beauty supply products? They wasn't there at that time. So it was tough for me to go to swim lessons because if I got my hair wet, I couldn't just pull it back in a ponytail like the other girls in my class did. So I think probably that's the closest thing I would relate to the cultural part of it. But again, that's just us centering straight hair. centering hair like that and European hair, that kind of thing, instead of thinking of measures in which you include everybody. Because we just saw the Olympic team, right? The swimming team, their caps weren't allowed in because they didn't consider that a part of the uniform, or it wasn't like technically appropriate for them. And it's something that can fit the entire afro in, because the regular swim caps won't get this hair in there. And so I think that's what I would refer that to. It's not necessarily a cultural issue, but it's if we center whiteness in these conversations, and of course, on the outside, it's gonna look like there are barriers to getting in from our communities, which in case the access looks different.
Did you all hear that quote from the Olympic Committee that tried to ban those swim caps from black women? They said it does not conform to the natural shape of a head. Or it does not, like, and it's like, wait, I'm sorry, what? Are we going back to that? That wasn't that like a long time ago when they were talking about shapes of our heads? But they're still talking about how our heads are not shaped the same, like literally a week ago. And that's why the swim caps are banned. It's not over.
I'm going to respond to that question with a response that's a little bit adjacent, but I think this might be the moment to chat about this a little bit. We talked a little bit about the overt racism that exists. I think, from my perspective, and it's a very limited perspective, one of the things that really prevents us from moving forward is that I think most of us, when we say inclusion, we actually mean assimilation, right? We're not talking about inclusion, really. So, what we're asking people to do is to suppress their actual identity and assimilate, whether that's about food, about clothing, about language, to the dominant culture. So, it's not the overt stuff that I worry about that, but I don't worry about that as much as all of us who have our implicit biases, who are working and trying to include, and simultaneously not understanding that we're actually asking people to assimilate into who we are. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a little heavy, I think it's really good to be able to talk about how we do the things we do in the outdoors, why we do the things we do in the outdoors, understanding that there are things like cost as a barrier, and things that people dream about, or that they blog about, if that's still a thing, or TikTok about or something. All this stuff costs money. It's the gear, right? Patricia alluded to that. So we have this opportunity, at least locally. We have a lot of city parks, we have a lot of regional parks, we have a lot of trails, open space. We have these opportunities. So how can our local and our urban green spaces be used to encourage our recreational opportunities and not really look towards those really cost-prohibitive, backpacking trips across Europe as an ultimate goal or something like that? How can we maximize our local spaces that we currently have?
I'll go. So I think in our experience at GoCo with our Gen Wild communities, the idea of starting small and how can we invest in community organizations that already have trusted relationships with any given community to activate programming at local parks that is responsive to community interests and demands. It's not necessarily to say that any given community is interested in rock climbing or fishing. Folks might just be interested in getting together for a picnic and playing bocce ball and celebrating that as a wonderful, valuable outdoor experience and activity. So I would say keep it simple in my experience. First, to activate those local parks, work with the organizations who have those trusted relationships, and ask community what type of outdoor experience they value and mobilize around that idea.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go back to some of the questions that the audience has asked. last, as you guys have shared some of your thoughts related to the questions we've answered thus far. So, Mitsu, you talked about assimilation, and the question was, why does assimilating to white, what does assimilating to white norms look like in the outdoors? And then as a question, a follow-up question, what are the unique ways that Black, Indigenous, people of color communities can engage within the outdoors?
Got it. What does assimilating, wow, that's a big question. At least I can speak most eloquently maybe around the climbing space, right? That's what I know, the climb and ski and the mountaineering and the alpine space. What it requires actually for me to be in this space, if you think about a Japanese person, right? Or there's a lot of stereotypes about being quiet, being respectful, et cetera, et cetera. Fundamentally, my construction, my thinking, is actually always thinking about the other people around me, right? Before myself, that is the construct, right? East Asians, we think about our existence in relationship to other human beings. If you think about the climbing community, we're very individualistic, right? We think about ourselves first, and it's not a judgment, right? That's just how the construction is. The English language is actually constructed around individualism. So for me to climb with my climbing partners and even have conversations or make decisions, I have to actually assimilate and think in terms of English rather than my native language. Right? So that's one example of something that happens, right? So if I'm, say, skiing, and we need to make a decision about, a slope that might slide or avalanche, that conversation, for me to put my opinion out there and also think about how do I save this person's face, how do I elevate that person's opinion, but I think it's actually still wrong. Like there's a whole lot of strategy that has to happen. And the way that I show up has to actually change from being Japanese to being American, right? To be heard, to be part of that conversation. So it's actually very difficult. Does that answer that question maybe? Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I've got 3 specific examples too before we go on to, back to part B.
I don't know part B.
I don't either. I'm just going to throw it back to you. Hope you did.
I'll reread it. Yeah.
Okay, but before that one, I've got 3 specific examples of assimilation, right? So there's one group I heard about taking a bunch of young Black men rock climbing. They're just going to go bouldering, right? So the instruction was bring sneakers. See where this is going. So they all rolled up in these super fly kicks. They're like, yes, I get to wear my sneakers, yes. And they were horrified to learn that they were then going to have to get them dirty, right? So sneakers, you can get dirty, right? And so it sounds, the fact that it just sounds like a good chuckle is which I laughed at that myself, no shame, but it sounds like a good chuckle, but then that was a real barrier to those kids actually not just learning to climb, but enjoying the general experience, right? So regardless of whether they ended up climbing, they're all pretty bummed out for at least a short while. They all feel like they failed at something. They all felt like they kind of let down the people who brought them there. And so that's a little demoralizing before they even touched a rock. So making sure you're really clear with what you mean when you say something like bring sneakers, right, to different folks. Then my business partner, Parker, is known for wearing very bright head wraps. So she's Black and she wears a lot of African print shirts and head wraps when she goes hiking. And an example of some microaggressions, a lot of people love to compliment her, but what happens is when people come out and point at her and say I'm pointing at you, you're right in front of me, sir. Wow, that's so amazing. She's wearing a head wrap to protect her hair, literally. It's not just a fashion statement, but folks who don't understand the context of why she is dressed like that to go out in the woods and why she isn't dressed like them, and then to make it overtly special. At some points, we just want to hike. We just want to go out maybe pointed out, even in a positive way, can just remind us constantly that we're not normal, we're not belonging. This isn't how we see it in the REI ad, right? So even the best intentions of pointing something out can be a reminder of those oppressions. And then finally, I fly fish. I've been fishing since I was about 3, and the way that I fly fish is not typical. So I go fishing, and I don't know the names of anything except like an Alcaracatus and a zebra midge. That's like my max knowledge, right? So everyone's like, oh, what do you throw? I'm like, what you go? Like, oh, it's 5, 6 feet. And I'm like, I don't know, but I catch fish, so leave me alone. So just even as a lot of my women counterparts, right, out in the outdoors, you know, have a lot of people come up to them just to try to help, and it's like, why would you assume I've been fishing? I just caught like 4 fish. Like, what? You haven't caught any, and you're bored, so that's why you're over here. If you were catching fish, you would still be over there. People, like, that's again best intentions. So it's not just hate stuff. I see swastikas, I see Confederate flags, that's all terrible, but it's even the really well-intentioned stuff, and that can seem really hard to process. But just think about the impact of, it's not just you doing that to me, it's like tons of people every single day reminding me that I'm different, reminding Parker that she's different, reminding these kids that they didn't bring shoes that were dirty enough or cheap enough, you know, and it's like, that's just constant, like,
I guess, you know, talking about assimilation, I'm not sure how much of that I do, like, actively. You know, I did mention the hair, and like I had my hair, you know, straight for a long time. But I'll say this, to me it looks like when I go outdoors, I look around and I notice I'm the only one that looks anything like me. I try to make myself literally and figuratively smaller at times. I can just, you know, drive into Lake George or Florissant, get in the Hartselle. There are times where I'm at places where I realize where I am I'm very in tune to where I am, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to speak too loud. I don't want people to think I'm an angry black woman, so if something happens here, I can't even confront the person over something that might be an actual slight. If I'm out in the park, I want to make sure my music isn't too loud, because what's the stereotype about that? And these are things that I myself am trying to work my way out of, and it still takes a lot of work. But I'm very acutely aware of where I am in that space and how I present myself. I cannot tell you how many times I have gone fishing and just put on that Kenny Chesney, because I'm like, they will like me if I'm listening to Keith Urban or whatever. By the way, I do love Keith Urban. That's a whole different story. But that's what assimilation looks like to me. When I hiked the Colorado Trail last year, I was the only black person I saw over the whole 486 miles on that trail. And then we're getting into those towns as we get, you know, further from Denver. I'm getting into the Lake City. I'm getting into the Silverton. And I'm concerned that if something happens here, I'm by myself. And so I try my best to make sure on that trail, when I'm in a far-flung place, I'm not going to offend anybody. No one's going to get angry at me, because I'm alone. And there's a whole bunch of trees, seriously, like Crystal was saying, it looks different. So assimilation to me, I think, in my mind, I even try to counsel my son on it sometimes, like, bring your voice down, we don't want to draw attention to us, that kind of thing.
Thank you. So we've been sitting for an hour, and I think I'm gonna just initiate a quick stand-up stretch for people, if you so choose. And the question from the audience was, how many employees and how many employees are part of GoCo staff, and of those employees, how many are Black, Indigenous, people of color? And are there decision makers at GoCo that are people of color?
Great, I really appreciate this question. So we have about 23 staff members, and less than 20% of our staff identify as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color. This governor is doing a really wonderful job appointing more board members who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So I would say we're pushing about 40% on our board, and that is a statewide bipartisan board. We recognize the deficiency on the GoCo staff. We have spent a lot of time with our kind of DEI consultant. Her name is Dr. Nina Mosby-Tyler, and she runs a shop called the HR Shop, and we have spent a lot of time with the HR Shop and Dr. Nina reviewing our criteria, our job descriptions, and evolving those to try to make our kind of processes more accessible, and also how can we reflect on ourselves as a culture to make our culture more accessible. So we don't champion where we're at as an organization. We know we have a lot of room to grow and get better at that, and we're actively trying to pursue that from a learning-based approach. We also recognize that there are kind of barriers to careers in the outdoors in general in our experience. And so we launched a fellowship program about a year ago to try to help our partners create more accessible environments for and welcoming environments for Black, Indigenous, and communities of color to become part of their staff and payroll. And so we're currently, that's an annual program that we're running now. We're currently partnering with 3 land trusts. We have 2 fellows located actually here in Colorado Springs to try to create those opportunities and create that pipeline, which I'm not even sure is the right way to say it, and then invest in our partnership network to learn about what barriers that they're creating to jobs in the outdoors, and how we can learn alongside those partners so that we can all become better. So.
Thank you, Jackie. So let's go into some challenges and related to equity. So one of the questions that we received is asking your perspective on the greatest challenges facing equity in the outdoors based on your experience. It's a 2-part question, so I'll start with that.
I blacked out, Nina. Can you repeat that?
Yes, yeah. Sorry. All right, what are the greatest challenges facing equity in the outdoors from your experience? And then I'll just read the second part of that. And how do you change systemic white supremacist organizational practices?
They talk to each other.
Cookies are dangerous for microphones. Watch out.
All right, thank you so much. My thingy is blinking. I don't know if that means something. So equity in the outdoors. One of the things that I see as a barrier is I went to Outdoor Retailer last week, and that's a place where the biggest companies in the outdoors usually go, not this year. And they do not just like booths or anything, but they do $1 million deals where they'll sell like a ton of backpacks to all REIs, right? So that's where business happens in the outdoor industry. And one of the things that's kind of a joke there is if you look up at all the banners and signage, it's very diverse, and you look down at the actual people, it is not diverse. So there's kind of a mismatch. So this year, I attended a panel on equity in outdoors, and they spent the whole time talking about diversity in the outdoors, right? So when people throw around equity in the outdoors, sometimes the actual takeaways get lost because they just talk about diversifying. And those are 2 very different things. So equity is different than equality, right? So has anybody seen that image that frequently brought up in diversity training of the 3 people looking over the fence? You back there. And there's a tall person, a medium-height person, and a very short person, and they're trying to watch a baseball game. The tall person talented person could barely see, right? Equity is redistributing those, and a tall person saying, we're not taking them away from the baseball game, but not giving them a box. They always could see that baseball game, right? But if we give that box to the short person, everyone has equity, right? So that sounds really great in theory, and everyone's like, I did, I have it in my door, right? But when you put it into practice, it's a little bit harder. Try it with your kids, all right? Right? So just think about it. Like, I got really annoyed when my parents bought my brother a car, and then told me that I was doing well enough to not need their help, right? I was really upset, but you know what? I still got a car because they actually were right in the end, and I'm not traumatized by that very much anymore. Definitely not thinking about it every single day. But that's equity in practice. People get upset, it's messy, right? And like, oh, why should we give Patricia a bunch of free stuff just because she's black? And I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? Like, yes, that's exactly what we need. That's like developing free stuff, or like have easy access to full-time help and be able to see the baseball game the whole time, right? And by giving her free stuff or money or things to help other folks that have never been able to see the baseball game, we're not taking anything away from people who've already had access to all those resources. But when you put it into practice, that equity word gets lost and people end up just talking about diversity because that's easier. People aren't as upset, aren't as many hard feelings. It's not like, what about me? But we really need to make sure to stick to that word if we're gonna use it and really back up the fact that we mean equity and not equality.
I can follow up. This is still blinking. Can we share this? Oh, yeah, we'll just put it in the middle. Yeah, that question about the outdoor industry and equity, white supremacy. I firmly believe, at the end of the day, what we have to do is that the principles of these brands and organizations need to change. Right? We're not going to get to real change as long as the same people are the principles of the organizations, the CEOs, the EDs, the folks that make the decisions. Because we control the priorities, right? We control the budget, and it's not enough to say, you know, I've hired all of these people of color to advise me. And that's nonsense from my perspective. I don't think there's any brands that come out now and say, you know, gender equity is the most important priority, and we hired this white man to lead it, right? It doesn't happen, but we still do that within the outdoor industry. And I'm also really clear that people like me, who are very white adjacent, like I grew up with a lot of privilege, and I can coach into both spaces very easily. My job is just transition, right? I can't be here for more than 5 years leading the American Alpine Club, because my role is to actually make it a place that someone who is less white adjacent can lead the organization. So, you know, we have to be ready to I would say, give up our power and give up our privilege and step aside and let somebody else lead these organizations.
Okay, always just want to make sure. Respecting space. Okay, so going into that a little bit more, isn't the real cultural barrier to the outdoors white supremacy and not the individual communities of color and their own traditions?
Yes, yes.
I saw this one come in over break, and I want to acknowledge that I was nervous to say this earlier, right? I don't know my audience right now. I actually said to Mina, I don't know if this audience is ready to hear what I would have to say on this. And I just want to acknowledge that. And I would like to thank Patricia for literally being in my ear saying, go girl, do it. So can you just repeat the question one more time so everyone can make sure they can?
Of course. So, isn't the real cultural barrier to the outdoors white supremacy and not the individual communities of color and their own traditions?
Yes. So, one of the reasons I got into this work is actually, as my new best friend named Alan over here, best friends now for life, he just reminded me that he actually started hunting because he saw a video series I did for Colorado Parks and Wildlife called My First Big Game Hunt. And I filmed myself for a year and a half learning how to hunt big game. And one of the things that I did very intentionally was never mention race, never mention diversity, never mention any of that. Right? I knew very well the patterns of systemic oppression, specifically with a typical hunting audience that is vocal about the demographic that they are and those politics that follow. There's a request for me to speak slower, and I definitely think I got that one. So I very intentionally, just to experiment for 16 episodes about me hunting, I wanted to show a female minority millennial who had a big barrier to entry. I was terrified of firearms, learning how to hunt. And then I was also, if you see me talk for more than 5 minutes, I'm silly, right? And I was just like myself to try to show a different perspective. But I knew what I was up against. And I'm using this example because the white supremacy concept is so clear in the hunting world. I intentionally did not mention anything about race, and guess what we got a lot of complaints about? Why do you have to make it all about race? Yeah, and I was like, I challenge you to watch. Did I mention race one time? Did I? No. And still somehow, just by being in that space and taking up space on YouTube, I was like, this liberal hippie who's like telling everyone that white people are terrible. And I was like, watch it again. There's not one example where I talk about oppression or racism. And you know what? I was so scared every single time I went out to do that. I was terrified because it was the unknown out there that I faced. So for the first part of it, I refused to hunt on public land. I only wanted private land where I knew me and my hunting mentor would be the only people out there. The only people out there with guns. And I wanted people to know, I went to the doors of the private landowners and I said, hi, I'm Crystal, I will be the person on your land. Subtext, if you see a black person with a gun, that is me, hunting. I will also be wearing orange. So these are a bunch of extra things I had to bring, and this was for work. This wasn't just for fun. This is what I had to bring to my job. And before we brought in more diversity to the agency's marketing materials, I was like, let's experiment on me first, right? Because I have the keys to the kingdom. I had control over Facebook comments, Instagram comments. I could just delete nasty stuff, right? So it was very scary, and the first time I went hunting on public lands, my hunting mentor, who's a white man, did not understand my fears. And so the white supremacy, not just as hooded Klan members, but just as white as the default, right? That the fact that I knew in advance and I could guess that I wouldn't be belonging in the hunting space, that's the white supremacy that we're talking about. It's not just cross burnings and the N-word. White supremacy is a much bigger, broader concept that sounds scary, but it actually just means white as the default, white as, the presumption of belonging, white as the presumption if there's an altercation that they're probably the correct person, the believable person, right? So then you add firearms to that, and me just being scared of firearms in general. And so it wasn't necessarily that I was certain that there was like racist white supremacy Nazis out everywhere I was. It was the unknown, and that took a really big toll on me. And because the white supremacy was so seeped into every aspect of it, I couldn't even talk about it in the videos. I didn't talk about it, and I still got crap for it, right? So I can do every single thing the way that these folks would want me to be quiet, to be silent, to not speak about it, to not address it, right? And I'm still wrong. And that is white supremacy, and that is a huge barrier to the outdoors. And that's a concept I honestly, like, I'm not sure it's gonna resonate still, so maybe do some, read a book or something like that in addition to this. But remember the story about me just trying to enter this space, and just like Patricia said, being small, making myself smaller, making myself more approachable, and just, I literally, every single time I went out, I had a Colorado Parks and Wildlife officer with me as well, where they knew where I was, or I asked them to watch me from a distance. And that is white supremacy, and that is a huge barrier to the outdoors, and it's a huge privilege I was afforded for being an employee of the state, for being an employee of Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And so when I get asked to go do speeches about how I'm such this like success story in diversity in hunting, I'm like, no, I'm not. This is not replicable in the real world. Because if I can face it with all these precautions, how am I supposed to convince Patricia to do it without them?
Wow. When Crystal was talking about our audience, I was like, yes, let's go there. This question came up. Like I said, I've lived here for 27 years, and I'm not sure of all their faces or how this conversation is going to go, but I'm totally comfortable with speaking that truth here today and going back to my home and knowing that y'all know where I work. And my business office is on South State Home. What Crystal was mentioning about, white hoods and being called the N-word, that's the stuff that people feel comfortable with because that's not them, right? Like, y'all don't go home and put on a hood. I don't, but what I'm saying is people aren't going home putting on hoods. People aren't, it's not comfortable in this society. It's not acceptable to go around calling people N-words, etc., right? Religiously, it's not. But I think what we need to circle around and think about is this country is anti-Black. And it has to be to have the success it has had economically. This country is built on white supremacy, and it had to have been to have the success it's had economically. I'm going back to finish my philosophy degree at UCCS this semester, and I already got the syllabus from one of my professors in philosophy, and I already know it's going to be stressed. The final paper for my philosophy and capitalism class was slavery necessary for the success of North American capitalism? And I can't wait to write this paper, but I'll give y'all a preview. For American success, yes. And what that means is it is built into the fabric of this building, this land, everything, your public education system, everything you really thought about is ingrained with anti-Blackness and white supremacy, as long as this country is capitalist. Now, I'm not gonna go on an anti-capitalism rant, that's a different conversation. But what I'm saying is if we're gonna participate in this structure, we have to recenter that and recenter the idea of whiteness as being the norm, and how that looks for people like us. And so think about, okay, we're not wearing hoods, okay, we're not saying N-words, but why did Crystal feel uncomfortable out there? Why do I personally, somebody who lived in Divide, Colorado, still felt a little out of place in Divide, Colorado? Because it's just like Crystal was saying, I don't have to talk about Black Packers, even though it's pretty on the nose, right, Black Packers? It's inherent in me being in that space that I'm a Black Packer, that I'm a Black woman out there. And so yes, I think that the central problem for the outdoors, as is many of the different communities we have in this country, is going to be white supremacy, and speaking specifically to my community, anti-Blackness. And I think the outdoor community has a ton of work to do in the difference between diversity and inclusion, and then equity and justice.
Okay. So, thinking about ways that we can try to potentially repair some of these injustices that have occurred, are there forms of reparations that could make the outdoors more equitable or address historical violence? These are great questions from our audience. I just have to say, thank you for being authentically real. Thank you. So, I'll read it again. Are there forms of reparations that could make the outdoors more equitable or address historical violences? These are also very deep questions, so thank you for that.
Take my 40 acres and a mule. It's outdoors. Hi, Crystal here. So I'm pointing at Jackie because I think GoCo does amazing work. It's not like reparations, but I think some of my experiences with the GoCo liaison we had with Colorado Parks and Wildlife were so incredible. Where she doesn't work there anymore, so I can out her now. She did the work behind the scenes for me, and lined everything up to help me kind of apply for some stuff. Not her fault that I wasn't allowed to end up submitting the applications, but there are so many ways that I'm just looking at you because you got the checkbook at this panel, so that GoCo can be absolutely relied upon to do that work, no fault of their own, in the examples that I have experienced, that they didn't end up coming to fruition, but I don't even know how to describe it, and I would not have said this if the liaison did not work there anymore. But it was incredible, the things that she did, the ways that she tried to make sure I had the knowledge and the access. She went out of her way. It wasn't just posting a grant opportunity on a website and then cross-posting on, Outdoor Afro in hopes that I see it because I'm in that group, right? It's direct phone calls, it's emails, it's behind that scenes work that sees a barrier to a communication about an opportunity and then says, nice try. I'm gonna make sure that this specific person or the specific organization at least knows about it and I can help them. And so that's not necessary. So when I started talking about it a tiny bit, I got, why are you talking to her? Why are you having lunch with her? And it was, I was like, she called me. And then I just ended up stopped talking about it, right? And we just kind of did the work quietly. And then, so my takeaway is to encourage folks, don't take no as an answer. It's a starting point. I have a sign in front of my desk that says, I eat no for breakfast. And find a way to make sure that the barriers that are being thrown up, if you're going to call it a barrier, make sure it's a real one and not one that is just part of a system of this is how it's always been done. Because there's organizations like GoCo that are trying their darndest. So, just make sure to rip those barriers down or reframe it and see it for what it really is.
Thank you so much, Kristen, for bringing that to a digestible example. And just, one tactical approach we're making as a funder is investing more in capacity and in people, which oftentimes grant makers want to invest in the end product and, not all the hard work and community mobilization that's required to turn that project into a success. And so for the first time in a long time, we're allowing local governments, we're allowing, youth serving organizations, I say allowing, but And we're paying the community liaisons who are serving as that bridge between community and the grantee for GoCo funds. We're paying them for their time, their wisdom, and expertise. And then we're turning around and reinvesting in those communities through different educational opportunities, whether that be about coalition building or community development or parks, trails, and open space, or this very topic about diversity, equity, inclusion in the outdoors. So again, as a funder, just trying not to just focus on the end product, but to fuel the energy and the passion and the individuals behind the movement.
This is a small example, but I don't have permission to use this brand's name because they want to be anonymous about the work that they're doing. But it's one of our partners, especially if you just look through our partners and figure it out at this point. But they've actually gone back and asked themselves, they've used, I think they would call it Native American patterns or inspired items in their brand, and they've sold this for many, many years. They've hired a person now to find the origins of these patterns and pay back those tribes and nations where they didn't figure out where the origins were. So, it's a small example, but my hope maybe is that other brands might do similar work in the future.
So thinking about not just diversity and not just from a race perspective, are there ways that the outdoors can be made more inclusive for differently abled people?
Yeah, that's a big one. It's something, see if I'm talking in here. Yes, I think there's a lot that can be done, and I can't pretend that I have all of those answers, but I think inherently in the outdoor community, we kind of build the nature of it is kind of like able-bodied and chasing the stoke, essentially. And because disabilities can look a variety of different ways, so we're not just talking about the person who uses a wheelchair, because that's also something we need to work on. There's some great state parks in Colorado that have been doing that. I think Brighton State Park Bar Lake State Park is one of those parks that have been doing it. There's some great examples of that. But not just looking at ability as a person whose disability you can immediately see, the differing kind of people. And I sit here as somebody who has a disability that you probably cannot see. It looks different and it manifests differently. And so I think that there's a lot that can be done with that, and I think that people have been making that push, but they've been making that push more towards, I guess, I wouldn't say mainstream, but what they assume disability looks like, as opposed to the variety of manners in which people use trails or open spaces or recreate in the outdoors. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done there.
You also I was working with a client. I do consulting as well, but I was working with this long-term client, and they, I don't know how to say this without telling folks who they are. It's a performance space, and they have a lot of money to put on performances and shows. But for some reason, they have just the right amount of money to put on shows that end up looking like they are for and by people in their leadership, right? So for some reason, when we build a park, when we build a trail, when we put on a performance or a show, there's always just enough money for them to do it in a way that makes it work out really well for, let's just say, an able-bodied white man, right? But the second you try to expand it, like, let's put it on a show featuring people who use adaptive equipment, right? And they're the actors. Or, oh, we have to fly in a black director because there aren't any in Denver. Probably are. But, there's always those extra costs that people say are the barriers, right? We would love to put signs in Braille, but we just don't have the money for it. but for some reason, you have enough money to make it for you, right? You stopped your fundraising at that level. You put your fundraising goal at the amount that works for a show or a space or a trail or a park that works for the person who's in charge of construction or executing it, which is one of the reasons why it's so important to have people that don't look like those folks at the top, so they can build something that looks more like them, or for the people they know. Diversify your boards for the same reason. Somebody who you may not expect might raise their hand and say, you know, hey, that's not me up there, like maybe we should raise the goal a little bit. But I see all these things that are perfectly well funded to a certain point, but then all of a sudden people run out of money when it's for somebody that doesn't look like them.
I'd just like to add to kind of shifting to kind of infrastructure projects and park development projects, the importance of reaching out to community and understanding the community that any local park or neighborhood park, pocket park is going to serve. Oftentimes, local governments, just check off the ADA requirements box, and that entire act needs to be revised. I don't know who wants to take that on, but somebody should, because it's entirely superficial. I mean, they call, wood chip fall surfacing to be ADA compliant, and they're not very inclusive in who they're considering in their when designing for ADA compliance. So again, it's on park developers and local governments to reach out to community members, get a good understanding of what limitations may exist and how they can tailor park design and construction to the individual needs of community members.
I think there is the infrastructure conversation, there's the programming conversation, and I think there's also this other conversation that we don't have enough, is about our own biases and definitions around what is able and what's not able. And I had an experience about a decade ago now. There's an organization called Paradox Sports. They're based up in Boulder. They take outdoor athletes, human-powered athletes, and try to normalize their lives. And really, normalizing their lives didn't actually mean normalizing the lives of the athletes. It's about normalizing the lives of their community around them, right? So we have to shift our thinking. So at that time, the board chair, I think, was Michelle Barnes, who works for the state now, and convinced me to come down for a weekend of climbing. And I had a vision of what climbing with folks without arms and legs might look like. And I would say that my mind didn't just shift. It was really, truly mind-blowing. There are, at that weekend, and I met this guy, Chad Buttrick, who a few years before that was told that he will probably never walk on uneven surfaces, right? He'd been walking on gym floor. When he asked to do that, his physical therapist took him out to a brick courtyard. A couple of years later at this event, I watched him backpack a woman on his back, post hole through snow, walk down class 3 terrain with her on his back, hanging onto a hemline. So, a few years before that, he was told, yeah, you'll never walk on uneven surfaces again, right? And that's the belief that many of us have, and that's the belief that we've tried to impose onto these folks who might be differently able. At that same event, the woman that was on his back had lost her leg in Haiti at the earthquake, and had just gotten her new leg or new foot. And she was just learning to climb again. And that evening, we were all a bit drunk, so this is probably not good for don't videotape this part. We're all sitting at the bar, and she was, sharing that she was going to have to buy a new car because she can't work the clutch anymore. I can't remember the guy that was sitting next to me, and he said, well, that's just not true. So here's my car keys, let's go out driving. They're drunk, so it's not good. But they just went up and drove the car around, and she came back and said, yeah, there's no problem here, right? And it's actually the community around them. We all felt uncomfortable. We all no longer called them to go climbing or skiing or cycling with them or running. It wasn't actually those folks who had changed. It's us who envisioned minister defines it, I think that was really deficient. There was a woman, Maureen Beck, she is just to the elbow. She climbs 5'11 plus, 5'12. Like, when you watch her climb, it's just magic. I don't understand how she holds on to these little groupers, but she just puts her elbow on it and she climbs up on it. And so, yeah, it's really just about perspective, often.
My mom has muscular dystrophy and uses a wheelchair 100% of the time, and she hates the word disabled. She's like, I can do everything I want to do. I'm able to do everything I want, I just don't. Like, who wants to run a marathon? She's like, I don't want to do that. And then this is not about the outdoors, but she's also a physician. When I say that, people go, is she still practicing? Doesn't she have muscular dystrophy? And I'm like, she's not running races while she's prescribing you Tylenol and to drink more water. So there's this like assumption that goes with it. And I teared up a little bit when you said that the prop they didn't change, like it's us. We're uncomfortable seeing them and addressing them, and that's kind of the same thing, different, like a parallel, sorry, not the same thing, it's a parallel with race, right? It's completely different, but it's a parallel where it's like, I'm not uncomfortable, I'm only uncomfortable because you're uncomfortable, I might be uncomfortable, I don't know if you're uncomfortable, I can't guess if you're uncomfortable, but there's a parallel there in some ways, but I really appreciated what you said about how that's more about us than them. And if you want a really great example of not just ADA compliance, but true inclusion, go to the Olympic Paralympic Museum. Holy cow, that place is designed around the people who have the largest adaptive equipment needs, and everyone else can use it perfectly. So instead of having staircase to go up to the top where then there's a ramp circling down, we can all use the elevator. And they made it super big and wide, so your party doesn't have to be separated. You don't have to send my mom up first and then I follow, right? If you build something, anything, even in a metaphorical way, to help people who need the most help, we can all still go to the Olympic Paralympic Museum and see the exhibits just fine. If we can't see them, you can hear them. And if you're like me, I can hear okay, I'm deaf in this ear, use a hearing aid, I could just use the extra assistance. Like, thank you for also having, like, how many people watch television with subtitles as well, even though you don't, yeah. 80% of people actually use subtitles at some point, even though they don't need them on television, just because it helps. So that is just a prime example of building something that is the most inclusive from the ground up, literally. And then I can go in just fine, but if you build something just for me, my mom can't go. So I don't take cost as like this thing. That big cost happens when it's an afterthought. If you build it in from the beginning, why are there stairs in front of us? We could all just go up a ramp. Like who's like, I can only use stairs? Right? Because that never happens.
I'll just interject that my daughter, who is able-bodied, uses closed captioning all the time so that she can learn how to continue to spell big words. Just saying. So, it's a thing. Okay. In our last few minutes, I think I'll ask one more audience question, and then I want to ask all of you, in the roles that you have, how you continue to support, advocate, talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion in the outdoors. So, thinking about our next generation, we have Generation Wild as an example of one of the ways in which we include our next generation of youth in the outdoors, because they will be the stewards after we leave this earth, physically at least. So, how are we going to educate our children? How are we going to talk about all the things that we talked about over these last almost 2 hours, so that they understand why it's so important to do things like have land acknowledgements, to understand that assimilation is something that they need to make their own choices about? How are we going to educate our children about the outdoors and these histories that we've experienced? I know it's really heavy in 7 minutes, but you know.
That is, you know, the goal of Generation Wild is to provide that the experiences and the community for young people, for Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, kind of to work together to experience the outdoors, so they ignite a passion for it and a curiosity about it and a love of it, so that they continue to pursue these outdoor experiences or education around the outdoors or careers in the outdoors. So in our opinion, breaking down local barriers to access and creating that entry point is really important. And then trusting the people at the community level who are serving as those shepherds of those experiences, and investing in the right organizations to provide that safe, accessible experiences for those young people, in our opinion, is really important. And then communicating in a language, sorry, one last thing. I really value Leave No Trace principles and use them, and we partner with Leave No Trace. And I think there's a way to take some of those principles and communicate them in a way that can be understood by different populations. So I think there's an opportunity for organizations like Leave No Trace to partner with community-based organizations to understand how those currently stated principles are translated at the community level, so that young people are inspired to kind of take care and steward the great outdoors as well.
I'd like to shout out Generation Wild down here in Colorado Springs. Chris, thank you so much. Backpackers is a part of that, and I brought that up because one of, you know, what Jackie was saying about partnering with people in the community is Generation Wild just saw what Backpackers was doing, and Chris reached out to us, and that means a lot. And in your own lives, you can do that if there's something you see that needs to be addressed. See if there's somebody in the community already doing it, because 9 times out of 10, there is somebody already doing it, and you can just throw your support behind them. And Generation Wild has been great with that, and just Chris in general, speaking sometimes where I want to step back, and I feel like I'm in a space where I don't want to speak anymore. The emotional labor is too much, and so, you know, Chris and Jackie, that's been great for Backpackers. I just want to put it out there in terms of what GovCore Generation Wild has been doing. And just really quickly on Leave No Trace, absolutely, I believe in those principles, and one thing I try to tell people a lot of times, we have a lot of new people going outdoors. The Outdoor Industry Association said that last year was the first year ever that there were more first-time users of the outdoors than returning users. And so what that means is, like Nina was saying, that next generation's out there, and we gotta, you know, have them be stewards of the land. And so one thing I like to tell people, instead of gatekeeping, which is what a lot of us do, right? Like, we don't want to tell our spots. We don't want people to go to Garden of the Gods, or whatever it is. They're not gonna Garden of the Gods. But whatever little hidden gem that we have, we don't like to share it. And I think it's so much more important to just tell people how to take care of it. And just talk about the 7 and how to do our not-Catholic campfires, that kind of thing. I think that's a lot more important to people than trying to keep them from it. So that's my little soapbox there for certain. We can definitely teach those principles to everybody. And like you said, in a digestible way. At Backpackers, we don't do it like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. When somebody asks you on a trip, because inevitably they will, am I going to get eaten by a bear? The answer is no. The answer is no. And then I talk about, you know, how to protect wildlife, which actually essentially protects us as well. So there's different ways of doing it, so it doesn't just sound like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
And I will say probably the most controversial thing you will hear today, which is give your kids the cell phones, okay? Don't be afraid of having cell phones in the outdoors, because there's so many apps like Native Lands app. There's iNaturalist. If they're like, what is that flower? It's weird. Google it. Like, get them to use their cell phone for something active in the outdoors if they're going to be doing it anyway, or they will be miserable. You know how I know this? Because I'm miserable, and I'm a grown-up who's addicted to her cell phone. So there's Starry Night app, right? You just point it at the sky, and even in the daytime, you can see all the constellations. You can see satellites. You can click on them for more information about what those satellites do that are above you. There's, I forgot the name of it, but You download this, it takes a lot of data on your phone. You go like this and it does the same thing for mountains, right? There's so many really cool apps where it's a yes and then you get your kid away from, or any kid, whoever's kid it is you're with, away from, just texting. Like, people did not like Pokemon Go. I saw more people outside than ever. And it was kind of annoying because they didn't know where they were going, but they were outside. Are we really going to complain about how they got there or why? So I say, again, very controversial, give them your phone.
So in our last few minutes, and Erica will want to share a little bit and close this out for us, but Crystal, I'd really like you to share how your inclusive guide can help to create more safe and inviting communities in the outdoors.
Oh, you want me to talk about my favorite subject ever? Okay. Yeah, I actually, so Inclusive Journeys is our company, and Inclusive Guide is the website, right? Just to avoid some confusion here. Branding is not going well. Anyway, so I actually thought of it while I was out on that hunt, where it was my first hunt on public land. And my mentor said, how do you know that you're going to experience something bad? And I said, well, I don't, but I sure would like to know. When I go into the hardware store to get different ear protection or something like that, I would like to know as best as I can in advance. And he was like, well, you would need data to demonstrate that. And I was like, again, challenge accepted. So what people can do, and this really comes from an outdoor perspective, but we kind of took the idea from the original Green Book, which was a little book, because we didn't have the internet back then, where Black folks would mail in a postcard to this guy, Victor Green, and he would publish an annual publication of safe and welcoming places for Black travelers to stop at. And so we kind of took that and we expanded it because we couldn't figure out where to stop, right? I was like, I want my mom to be able to use it. She's white, she has muscular dystrophy, but I want her to be able to use it. I want Mitsu to be able to see himself represented. And in order to compare data, we need, white folks who don't typically experience oppression to establish a baseline. So then it was just like, oh, well, I guess now it's for everyone. So yeah, it's really important for, I guess I'll rephrase this. It was a very pivotal moment of reckoning for me to realize that I could tell every single traumatic story in the world and people would still say things like, what if that person was just having a bad day? Wow, what if that person just thought you were from like a city slicker, right? What if it was what you were wearing? One of the things I got once was, oh, is it because you're really pretty? And I'm like, that's, what? But am I? Is that a compliment? Like somehow, and so all of these excuses, and I'm like, it's not just me. I talk every time we hang out, we can't even talk about fun stuff. We just keep talking about oppression. So it's like, I know this is a problem, but I can't communicate that. So it turns out data and economic incentive is the solution we've come up with to at least give it a shot. And to try to demonstrate, I guess, more analytically, because our words, our stories aren't making enough of a change fast enough. And I would like to see something different happen within my lifetime. I always say this is a marathon, not a race. Don't expect to see all that. But I kind of want to. I kind of want to be around for that. Again, challenge accepted. So that's kind of what we do. And then we also, again, I said this earlier, we want to make sure that we give those places an opportunity to change and grow. Because I hope that people don't judge me on everything exactly, because I'm not perfect. I'm getting really close. I'm not perfect quite yet. But I would love for people to judge me on what I do when I receive information or somebody does do me a kindness of letting me know that I've offended them or I've said something inappropriate, what do I do next? And so that's what we hope to judge other folks on, other companies, other organizations on, is like, of course you're not going to be perfect. Like, if I'm not perfect, gosh. But what do you do now that you have that data? And if you don't want to do anything, fine, free country, that's fine. But, and we're not going to put you on blast. We focus on celebrating the places that celebrate you. We're going to provide an economic incentive to the places that are doing something. And they don't have to do it perfectly. No one's going to do it perfectly the first time. That would be very awesome. Not going to happen. But what are you doing now that you know? That's what we're all about.
Thank you, Crystal. We do have plenty of questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to everybody's question that was sent, but thank you for sending them in. I'm going to turn it over to Erica, and thank you to the panelists for sharing your wisdom and your experience.
Can we please give our panelists and our moderator another round of applause? I have been with the Heritage Series for over 2 years now, and most of the time our events are very celebratory and they're very fun. This is heavy stuff, and I am so grateful to the 4 panelists for sharing what they have shared and for being vulnerable in a room full of mostly white strangers. So thank you so much for that. Another quick thank you I want to make is Kyle Boyle is our IT guru. I think we often overlook the people, yes. The people who make these things happen, like the microphones with the masks, it's difficult. I really feel for our panelists and our moderator who have been speaking for hours through these masks. It's very difficult, but thank you to Kyle for helping us hear more clearly and for managing this for us. Very quickly, Becky Lineweber with Pikes Peak Outdoor Recreation Alliance asked me to give a quick blurb for some of the postcards that are on the table. Outdoor Recreation Alliance is part of Elevate the Peak, and they are seeking to better understand how Coloradans of all ages, backgrounds, and identities use outdoor spaces and find out what excites, inspires, and concerns residents as the Pikes Peak region enters a period of unprecedented growth. So please help them out by filling that out. Thank you. I'm someone who's really passionate about the outdoors. It's my refuge when life gets hard. It's where I go when I need inspiration, and it's where I go when I just need a break. I'm really fortunate because I don't face barriers to access like our panelists and like so many others do. Blodgett Open Space is literally my backyard. If that's not good enough, U Valley Park is 2 miles away. If that isn't tickling my fancy that day, I can get in my car and I can go wherever I want, and I can pay whatever I want. And access is incredibly important for people to be happy and healthy and for communities to thrive. It's awareness and learning to have this awareness that really excited me to convene this panel today. I knew we couldn't incorporate everybody's thoughts. We couldn't have every single person's perspective, but it felt really important to find a place to start. Sarah was teasing me earlier today because he got to open and I had the job of closing, and I like to be prepared. And so tying something up with a bow when you don't know what's gonna happen, that's really scary to me. And I'm actually not gonna do that for everybody, because I think what we need to do is we all need to find the next steps for ourselves and figure out what makes the most sense for each of us to be better and do better. What's gonna stick with me are Patricia's and Crystal's comments about trees. That is devastating. And that does not carry the weight for me, even close to what it carries for them. I'm also gonna think about Mitsu's comment about our desire to have people assimilate to us. These are a few of the things that I'm gonna be thinking about, and I hope that you all have found nuggets of things that you will carry with you to inspire you and to encourage you to do better. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you again to our panelists and our moderator, and have a wonderful, safe night.